You can't see the words that are over in the corner. For this video recording, you will see P spread, V spread, E spread for those words, so you don't have to read this finger spelling. I know that sometimes that can be difficult, but you will catch it when you see it.
Could anyone have seen this coming? As the coronavirus death toll hits a new milestone today, 100,000. There is a question that should haunt anyone in charge, especially in the US, because we have the most deaths from this now. And that brings us to our special report, digging into the answer and what science and recent history can teach all of us going forward. Now, how do we define seeing this coming? Well, this can mean this particular coronavirus and the danger of an infectious pandemic in general. And the answer is yes. Experts did see the risk and rising odds of exactly this kind of pandemic. Take Dr. Dennis Carroll. He ran emerging threats at USAID for over a decade. He's been dubbed the man who saw the pandemic coming. He literally helped create a program tracking viruses that spread from animals to humans.
A pandemic influenza will likely come from an animal. And it will be a new and novel, never seen before virus.
There are certain places that you want to pay particular attention to, and China is one of those.
It's the place where we've seen the emergence of virtually all of the deadly influenza viruses over the last half century.
A virus from an animal, likely from China. That doesn't sound eerily right by coincidence. It sounds right because that doctor's job was spotting pandemic threats and pushing policy to get ahead of them.
We are acting after the fact. We are responding to something that emerges.
With the proper risk mitigation measures, there's no excuse for any outbreak from becoming more than an outbreak. But it all begins with timely and effective surveillance.
Effective surveillance means listening to science and funding the science. This is an area where many governments can fall short. The Trump administration fell down completely. So what happened when Dr. Carroll and other experts issued those warnings that now look so prescient? Let me tell you something. The answer runs deeper than our current political moment. It goes all the way back to human patterns so ancient, they're literally part of mythology. These recent medical experts, they weren't only ignored, they were even sometimes punished, like the story of Cassandra. The ancient Greeks believed she was blessed with the gift of seeing the future, but cursed because her true predictions were never believed. She would call things right, but no one listened to her. And I'm sorry to say that is how some of these pandemic experts were treated, especially by people with the power to act on their warnings. Some examples well documented: the Trump administration ending that same Dr. Carroll's PREDICT program months before this outbreak, and disbanding the National Security Council's pandemic unit in 2018, a move that is so obviously backwards, Donald Trump himself didn't even try to defend the move, instead blaming others.
I didn't do it. We have a group of people. You say we did that. I don't know anything about it.
The problem, though, runs far deeper. For years, experts have pleaded to get ahead of this, stressing pandemics pose far more risk than other well-funded government concerns. That's a point that's been raised by the very famous, like Bill Gates, as well as by lesser-known pathogen experts toiling away, like Dr. Sira Madad, who warned that big cities like New York are more vulnerable because of biology and transportation.
You can have a virus where people feel well enough while they're infectious that they get on a plane or they go to a market.
It just takes, one person, one host, and then you can start a whole outbreak that can lead to a pandemic. If a passenger arrives in New York City with a novel disease like H7N9 flu, it could very well begin to spread undetected. In a matter of weeks, a novel virulent influenza strain will incapacitate our city.
Madad warning how this would play in her own city of New York, which is now the epicenter of the outbreak around the world. The state alone has more cases than any other country across the globe. And Dr. Medad led workshops like this one, a scenario 2 years ago provided to health care staff. Quote, China notifies WHO of an influenza virus. No cases outside of China. What would New York City do? This was what she was modeling. And it brings us back to a point about funding science. Medad was not just issuing a general warning. She pressed lawmakers to fund preparation for hospitals, for viral outbreaks, noting, we do not know when the next dangerous pathogen will arrive in our country, but we do know it will happen sooner or later. That was December, days before Chinese officials first alerted the WHO. Now, Medad also laying out the grim prospect of the overwhelming number of deaths if the US and other countries were not proactive, warning more bodies than morgues could handle, a tragic detail that also sadly proved true.
The demand for burials will become overwhelming and morgues will begin to overflow, just like we saw in 1918.
And in anticipation of a surge of coronavirus victims in the next few weeks, the city is now building a makeshift morgue, comprised of rows of white tents outside of Bellevue Hospital.
At the worst point, bodies were stored in refrigerated trucks because the morgues hit capacity. Now, in the same category of experts advocating solutions and funding to get ahead of a pandemic, there were policy gurus like Obama Homeland Security Advisor Lisa Monaco. Now, do you remember, say, September 2018? Washington was busy with the Kavanaugh hearings, but that same month, Monaco was warning Trump that cutting federal funding for pandemics by 50% was going to cost way more than it saved, noting those cuts brought funding to its lowest levels since the 2014 Ebola response, and warning Trump's poor pandemic prep was creating new vulnerabilities in health infrastructure for when the next global outbreak of infectious disease hits. Now, that was Monaco sounding a public plea for anyone who would listen, including the president. We also now know she personally led Trump's national security staff in a pandemic scenario training right before the inauguration.
We put together an exercise for the incoming national security team. I said that we needed to add a pandemic scenario to this exercise because I was so concerned that and thought that it would be a certainty that the next administration would deal with some type of public health crisis.
A certainty. Now, that's a Homeland Security chief who deals with all the threats from all the countries that attack the homeland and all the other threats like lone wolf terrorism. And there she is stressing public health pandemics had to be on that priority list. Now, Trump was not only downgrading those efforts, but putting resources into a wall. Remember the wall? Remember all that? Monaco also warning the U.S. could not make itself safer by walling ourselves off, noting the greater risk was the Trump administration will be challenged by, quote, some new pathogen, one that no wall will keep out. This is right on the money type stuff. Now, up to this point, with the examples I've given you, some could say, well, that still fits within a debate between administrations from opposing parties who fight over everything. But I want to be clear. Monaco was reflecting top medical experts. Take Dr. Jonah Mazet, also a part of running that PREDICT program I mentioned for a decade, and charting how this outbreak, quote, was going to involve, quote, coronaviruses jumping easily across species lines, and those are the ones to watch for, pandemics. And she warned the threat was growing and U.S. preparation was not.
We aren't much better prepared for the next pandemic than we were 100 years ago. We remain completely blind to the next one, where it will emerge and when.
Clearly, that didn't reshape federal policy or, frankly, much media or public opinion. Many didn't listen to these warnings. And they offered, of course, early context for how everyone might try to scientifically interpret when one of these pops up, like the first signs out of Wuhan. Now, for all the incredible and brave journalism during this time, this tough time, which includes reporters who literally risked their health around the world, there were also, to be clear, headlines like this. A Washington Post health reporter and New York Times columnist downplaying the virus early on, telling people to get a grip. And it was like the flu. Crucial early time squandered, even though Mazet had been emphasizing that the medicine and science shows how these outbreaks work, and that it shouldn't take waiting until one hits a wealthy country for action.
Does it take until it gets to the wealthy? Right now it is, but what we're trying to do is catalyze a change. When we know about viruses, we aren't necessarily doing the right thing. We have the responsibility now that when we know we do something about it, we characterize them more fully. We take steps towards understanding them better so that we don't wait until they hit our shores.
Don't wait till it hits your shores. This was available expertise in public. But that same Cassandra effect I mentioned, here it is in action. Some of the most prescient warnings and those early solutions specifically disbelieved.
We can now test for it in the locations where we know it exists. We can also look for it in other locations so we can predict where it might occur.
We don't have to test the entire state in the Middle West or wherever they may be. We don't have to test the entire state. I think it's ridiculous.
So that means we can put in place educational campaigns about how to prevent infection and spillover.
Oh, let's bludgeon Trump with this new hoax.
Bludgeon with this new hoax. Hannity got that exactly backwards. It's the virus that's real, and the people being bludgeoned are its 100,000 victims in America now. Not the president who defied the science. He's not the victim in the story. Now, we can note Hannity has later toned down his rhetoric. He also claims that he didn't mean it was actually a coronavirus hoax. You can hear him and judge for yourself. Now, these lost lives are the most serious consequence here, but even after grieving them, when we go forward and we try to debate the future and reopening the economy and where do we go from here, it's these same experts who were ignored that offer another lesson. Investing in this science up front, this low cost of prevention, is not only safer, it's also better economics than the high cost of another uncontrolled outbreak, be it this one or the next one.
We know that that amount of money pales in comparison at a cost of just less than 10% of a single large epidemic response. We could discover the majority of the planet's yet to be known viral threats.
So let's just take that all in. It's a lot, but I'm walking through all of it because it's so important to you, to your life, to your family, to your community. What do we have here? Independent experts ignored. Government veterans who sat in the same seats, making the same, sometimes very tough calls, ignored. But then for Trump, it actually gets even worse. Which brings me to the final part of this special report that I want you to see, that I'm sharing with you because it matters so much. These were the calls coming from inside the Trump White House. Trump not only ignoring the doctors and the Obama officials, he went full Cassandra on the experts and aides in his own administration. Now this is the most damning part of the history for Trump. Some of these lessons have nothing to do with him, as I've mentioned, but on this, he actually had some of the right plans available in his hands, inside his administration, had he only listened. Take Dr. Nancy Messonnier, nonpartisan expert who literally ran the CDC Immunization Center. Whether you've heard of her or not, if you're the president, you're supposed to know who these top people are so you can listen to them and appraise their science. She knows this stuff. This is her thing. Back in February, before this was all front page news, before any governors were talking quarantines, when the presidential primaries were still in full bloom, she did the thing that many people avoid in government. She took a stand, risked her career to deliver the bad news that so many people didn't want to hear, including her bosses. She told reporters on record in public the science was showing this virus was going to arrive. And that meant disrupting life, planning for closed schools, working from home, lost income. She said that may sound overwhelming at a time when no one was really talking like that in public. She said it may sound severe, but she said something you always want to hear from the scientific experts who are basically helping you make life and death decisions in government. She said, let's get on this now. Listen to this closely as we hit 100,000 deaths tonight, because she hit the nail on the head in February in public.
And I told my children that while I didn't think that they were at risk right now, we as a family need to be preparing for significant disruption of our lives. You should think about what you would do for childcare if schools or daycares close. Is teleworking an option for you? Secondary consequences of some of these measures might include missed work and loss of income. This whole situation may seem overwhelming, and that disruption to everyday life may be severe. But these are things that people need to start thinking about now.
Thinking about now. That's it. She called it. Listening and acting on a top CDC expert's warning would have helped immensely. But that's not what the president did. Remember, the Cassandras of the world are often ignored or even sidelined. And Trump fits right into that playbook. Ignore, threaten to get a different answer, punish if you don't get it. Instead of heeding those warnings of those CDC doctors and experts in his own administration, we now know Trump was angry. He threatened to fire her, shouting that the doctor's call scared people. And he was alarmed of her talk of school closings, which of course is one of many things that actually would prove to be necessary. A furious Mr. Trump threatened to oust Dr. Messonnier, reported the Wall Street Journal. And even as Trump tried to disappear the facts and the science there in his face, to punish its source, to cover it all up, it's worth recalling many other people, regardless of their partisan politics, were actually immediately able to do on that day what Trump could not. They could hear a CDC expert presenting the facts. They could see the scientific significance of that. And they could respond to the implications immediately. On Wall Street, where, of course, Republicans trade just like Democrats, the markets heard that doctor. They began pricing in the risk. She explained the Dow crashing over 1,000 points. That was the Dow's largest single one-day drop to date at the time. Some of Trump's own political appointees were also writing out early warnings. China hawk and White House advisor Peter Navarro issued warnings in January saying the lack of immunity could lead to a, quote, full-blown pandemic. He was on the right track, the New York Times reporting. Trump was concerned, though, not about the health warning, but that Navarro wrote it down. A president who won't use email, a president who fought the Mueller probe by avoiding any paper evidence, was already thinking about the pandemic paper trail that could hurt him, instead of what to do about the facts being presented. Now, again, the Cassandra playbook: ignore, threaten, retaliate if needed. Well, Navarro, he came back in the fold. That's important as we try to understand what's been happening. He avoided that retaliation because he went out and started helping defend Trump on 60 Minutes, eating some of his words and attacking the press, saying, show me the 60 Minutes episode that said, hey, the global pandemic's coming. That's quite a dodge, since you could show the Navarro memo that said it. Now, others inside the administration didn't back down like him, and they say they also faced this retaliation for it. Dr. Bright says he was fired partly for sharing warnings about equipment.
We knew going into this pandemic that critical medical equipment would be in short supply. I pushed those warnings to our critical infrastructure protection team.
Predicting the U.S. would need more medical equipment was right. Doctor says he was ignored and then punished, like our friend, the unheard prophet Cassandra. The myth stressing how stubborn and powerful people would rather treat someone as literally insane than hear their bad news.
Give me your blessing for a happy voyage.
I cannot bless what I see in your future, Paris.
Cassandra! Cassandra, stop this.
But father, it's true. Her name is Death.
Cassandra! Forgive my sister. She suffers from an illness.
She will bring the disaster I have prophesied. Her name will be written in letters of fire.
Forgive her? But of course, it isn't the people who didn't listen. They're the ones who need forgiveness. The people who heard the warnings, especially people in power, and rejected them. They need forgiveness. This is a point made by another type of prophet, in my opinion, Lauryn Hill, whose poetry echoes today in this political crusade where we have people who are literally at war with truth, science, and accountability. She famously said, consequence is no coincidence. Hypocrites always want to play innocent, never want to face it when it's time for punishment. Hypocrites don't like consequences. But as another old saying goes, those who fail to learn history, of course, are deemed to repeat it. And I think that applies to ancient mythology as well as this recent pandemic history. Because we're not out of the woods tonight. Not by a long shot. So it is worth asking, should these Cassandras of this pandemic continue to be ignored, sidelined, and punished? Or are these the experts we should listen to now more than ever?
We are playing a game of Russian roulette.
We are one globe. What happens in every other place happens to us.
Right now, we are pretty stupid about what's out there waiting for us.
You should think about what you would do for childcare if schools or daycares close. Is teleworking an option for you?
We could discover the majority of the planet's yet to be known viral threats.
Turn the culture we have of reactivity to a culture of proactivity.
This whole situation may seem overwhelming and that disruption to everyday life may be severe. But these are things that people need to start thinking about now.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us.
I ask you, please, I'm putting my effort into this so that you can see what truth is. This is not fake news. This is not something that you can just ignore. This virus is not done yet. And how many more have to die before there's many of you out there need to get it? I don't need you. You don't need me. If you were to die tomorrow, hopefully you wrote your will so whoever gets the money, because you won't get to enjoy it. For the poor, guess what? We're left to bury in the potter's field because nobody cares. Nobody cares. Trump doesn't care. He only wants to become king for a second 4 years. I'm asking you, please, share this video with others. Thank you.